Emma, do you actually think do you have sympathy with these union bosses saying, look, my workers deserve a public sector pay increase?
I think Joe's right. I mean, anyone can have sympathy with people wanting to have more money in their bank account, for sure. But the fact that the union bosses are complaining that this is a kick in the teeth because they say because it's not in line with inflation that it's a real terms pay cut. Well, it's not as much as a real term pay cut as it would be if they didn't get this increase that they're already being offered. And the fact still stands that this money comes from the public purse. These are public sector workers. And that means that all of those people who are also suffering from the burden of the cost of living crisis, who are also suffering from inflation, who are not getting pay rises, are having to foot the bill. So if you really want to talk about fairness, you have to balance that pay rise, which I think in many cases, particularly in the case of nurses, I think nurses and police officers earn too little anyway. But you have to balance these things because this is public money. And unfortunately, Kemi Badenoch has now been knocked out of the leadership race. But this is a point that she made very well in her launch, the launch of her leadership speech, when she said that the government needs to spend money in the same way that individuals do. It needs to be careful that every single pound that is spent is value for money. And the problem is that at the moment in the public sector, we're not getting value for money. And I think that we need to be very responsible in how we choose to spend that money before we talk about giving them huge hikes and pay increases.
And one thing that Kemi said that I think really spoke to me, and it spoke to you, I know, as well, was that she said politicians need to start being honest with people. She said politicians need to say we've got no money, right? We haven't got a pot to pee in as far as the nation's debt expenditure is concerned. And the fact of the matter is, what I said at the very start of the show, as far as immigration is concerned, the government, politicians, even trade unions just aren't being honest with people about actually, one, the amount of money we can spend as a nation, two, the people coming here and the fact that mass migration is still ongoing. And there are so many ways in which the people out there, Emma, people watching this show now, are just sick to their back teeth of being lied to. Completely.
I think actually this is not just to do with the Conservative Party. This is why I, as a side point, think it's quite laughable to suggest that Labour would bring about more economic growth, because part of the problem is that the Conservatives have behaved like socialists by taxing everybody up to the eyeballs, and that damages growth. But I think that that you've touched on something important, which is that when the political class fail to communicate truthfully and honestly with the British public, it erodes trust, because it means that people's life experiences, their experiences of the unfairness of the fact that you have all of these people coming across the channel, essentially jumping the immigration queue ahead of people who may have more of a right to be here. Those people are taking up public services. They're being offered things like bespoke dentistry services when there are people around the country who have no access to a dentist. And there are people who fought, during the Second World War, who were having to sell their homes, and their families are having to take out loans and go into debt to pay for their care. So we see in everybody's life, we see all of these instances of what we regard as being a very, very unfair system, and the government has failed to communicate to people what their expectations can be, particularly over COVID with all of the public health policies. It seems that this has sent the message that there is some magic money tree and we can just keep funding from the public sector, and we talk about it as being government money, but it's not, it's ours.